August 3rd, 2006. What's so special about that day? It is the day that the Rhythm Heaven franchise was first released. Rhythm Heaven isn't the most popular Nintendo franchise, but its niche nature hasn't prevented it from getting 3 sequels so far, and hopefully more to come. My name is Jonna, and to start this celebration of the franchise's 15th anniversary, let's have a retrospective and look back on where it's been thus far. Whether you've never seen 1 minute of the series or have played it countless times, I hope this can be an interesting journey. Now let's begin. The first Rhythm Heaven game was released in 2006, but to look back on the history, we're going to start in the vague before 2006. A few websites say development began in 2002, but I'm not entirely certain, and even if so, it spanned quite a few years. I believe some sort of drumming prototype was made within Nintendo itself at the time, but let's focus on the father of the series. You see, Mitsuo Terada, better known as Sunku with a male symbol, is a Japanese record producer, singer, songwriter, just overall a guy heavily involved in the Japanese music industry, and very prolific in it at that. He began as the lead singer of a group called Sharam Ku, but is also well known for being a producer and songwriter for various idol groups, notably for the Hello Project group under the TNX record company. At some point, according to Wikipedia in 2004, he approached Nintendo about making a certain type of game. Rhythm games are a very popular genre, especially in Japan. As someone who has actually been to Japan, I can attest that pretty much every arcade I went to had a dedicated floor to rhythm games, pretty much the only specific genre to get that. Game floors were far broader, like crane games or VR games, but this was just about gameplay. Well, admittedly, many had peripherals, but that's more par for the course than an outright gimmick, I'd say. At the time, Nintendo didn't have much to offer in the genre. They had Donkey Konga, which, if the 2004 approachment date is to be believed, then it had just come out. But other than that, there isn't anything else that I know of. I suppose there was the cancelled Fun with Music on NES, but not only was it cancelled, but if it was released, I'd have to imagine that it would be more educational than an outright rhythm game. So all we had was Donkey Konga, itself a spin-off of Taiko no Tatsujin, having been developed by the same Namco team as it and using pretty much the same mechanics. In other words, not exactly a product of Nintendo's own making. Sunku wanted to change that. He approached Nintendo with the idea of a rhythm game that, for one, unlike Donkey Konga, would be a dedicated franchise rather than a spin-off. But more importantly, Sunku wanted to make a rhythm game that did not rely on visual indicators for its gameplay. Most rhythm games, especially before this, have some sort of on-screen timer. It's much harder, if not impossible, to play muted, but you are usually heavily helped by the visuals, and often it's pretty much required. The only pre-Rhythm Heaven exception to this I can think of is Space Channel 5. But even that game was pretty much just Simon Says, whereas Rhythm Heaven features a variety of gameplay styles, though admittedly a lot of call and repeat. But in Rhythm Heaven, for the vast majority of it, you can play with your eyes closed. Of course, visuals do sometimes help, even often, but the game often tries to force you to rely on audio with screen blockers or odd visual effects. Not to mention, if you rely entirely on visuals, you will likely mess up quite a lot. Some people at Nintendo were wary of how this would work out, but eventually, on August 3rd, 2006, Rhythm Tengoku was released as a GBA song. In Japan, that is. In Rhythm Tengoku, after getting past the tutorial rhythm test, you get to play through a large variety of rhythm games. Each game is fairly simple, but most are unique. The most immediate source of variety is the input required from each game. Some only using the A button, some using A and B or requiring directions on the D-pad, though some games just use the D-pad universally, with every direction having the same action. Regardless of buttons, you will tend to have different timings, and have to grasp all the cues during the practice. This practice, which goes through the game's controls and timings, is almost always set to the same music track. Admittedly, a few games in this title actually don't give you practice in an effort to test your improvisation skills, but no other title does this, so it does seem the developers felt this strategy wasn't needed. After you get through the practice, you play each game, trying to hit as many inputs correctly as possible. If you do poorly, you get a try again, and have to attempt it again until you pass. If you do moderately well, you will pass and get an okay, but if you do incredible, you will get the highest rating of a superb and get a medal. The rating is based not just purely on how many inputs you hit, but what as well. Most games have some extra difficult inputs that are worth more, being super helpful or even required to get a superb or sometimes just an okay. After each set of 5 games, you will play a remix. Remixes are essentially the closest thing this game has to a boss fight. They take the last few games you played in the set and swap between them throughout it, often giving one or two essential focus with the others as a supporting role to an original song. They also use unique graphics, and particularly in the games after Tengoku, have a general theme like beach or space. These remixes, particularly in later entries, are where most of the song's lyrics come from. Repeat this formula for 5 sets of games, and then the final set before the credits features highly altered sequels with very different graphics and a new remix of the song, and they lack practice since you've already learned how they function. After these 5 games is a medley remix of sorts, a remix that just has segments from every game included, and the song matches. The game is beaten after this, but has 2 post-game sets. These have slightly different visuals, usually just an altered palette, and have different button presses required. These games are a bit harder, but the song is the same track, though it is sometimes changed in tempo. There are 2 sets of post-ending games. The first set's remix combines the tracks of the first, second, and 4th remix, and the last has a brand new track. Both of these forego the rule of only using the games from within the set, and just use various games throughout, picking and choosing. Aside from the main stuff, there's a side menu. It has a cafe, where you are given tips by the cafe owner, and they can occasionally allow you to skip games if you're struggling. There's also a sound test, options, and the ability to rewatch the credits. But the meat of this side menu is the bonus features, of which there are 3 types, unlocked by the aforementioned medals. The first is Rhythm Toys. These are extremely simple rhythmic actions, like making your own beat and pressing to the right amount. The more interesting unlockable in my eyes is the Endless games. These function the same as the main rhythm games, but shift the focus from a brief performance to, naturally, playing continuously until you fail, shooting for a high score. 2 of these are new games designed to be endless, and 2 are special versions of existing games made to last forever. Lastly, there are the drum lessons, where you play drums to the song. With the actual drums, hi-hats, it's fairly fleshed out. I speculate it was derived from the initial drumming techno. The final feature of Sword, and one capable of eliciting many emotions, is the perfect system. Occasionally, a perfect will open up for a game, and you will have 3 attempts to play a game without messing up a single input. If you succeed, you will get a bit of flavor text about the game, which can be read at the cafe. Otherwise, it will shuffle to another game, or just vanish if you don't have enough medals in enough other places. Rhythm Tengoku was only released in Japan, and despite being released nearly 2 years after the release of the DS, the game did sell moderately well. I can't find any reliable exact stats for sales, but based on the numbers we have of other games plus the areas and timing, it seems to have sold around 1/3 which isn't great, but not awful. I found an article from near release on Wired.com saying it is selling decent and attributing it to the fact that it was playable on a DS, notably showing it being displayed next to DS games at a game store. Video Game Sales Wiki states by December 2006, 4 months after launch, it had sold 264,000 copies. But the source is some game data library Google Sites thing that I really cannot figure out how to navigate. VG Charts, which is admittedly known to be somewhat unreliable, suggests that around 300k copies were sold, although this one doesn't give a source at all. Regardless, it was at least somewhat popular, as sometime before 2007, after Rhythm Tengoku became a hit, Nintendo's words, not mine, Sega themselves approached Nintendo and asked to make an arcade version of Rhythm Tengoku, which was released on September 20th, 2007, a little over a year after the GBA game released. It was essentially just the same game on an arcade machine, with you needing to pay to play and losing your credit if not getting a good enough score. Also, there's the option, if you pay more, to play with 2 players, which varies from game to game, sometimes being split screen, sometimes having the second player control an extra character, and sometimes having you take turns. Your score is averaged between the 2 of you. But aside from arcade money-taking tactics, there was one major addition. This arcade version had an extra set of games that was the first set, but at a 50% faster tempo. The visuals also change, giving Karate Joe boxing gloves and shorts, the Clappy Trio space gear, and so on. Speaking of them, Rhythm Heaven's various minigames are perhaps most notable for their colorful cast of characters. Most just appear in their game and in remixes or a sequel, but some have recurring occurrences. Notably, 3 games introduced in this title would become series staples, being Karate Man, Samurai Slice, and Built to Scale. Each would get something in each title, with Karate Man having the most, getting an outright new minigame and a sequel to that in each title, whereas Samurai Slice and Built to Scale would always get some appearance, but at least one title has some caveat. Mainly that Samurai Slice was an endless game in the DS title, and that there was no new Built to Scale in Rhythm Heaven Mega Mix, just the one from Fever as a bonus game. Some characters, like the Clappy Trio and the Space Dancers, continued to appear throughout the series, but in different roles, rather than the game itself being repeated. Also, monkeys. Monkeys are in a lot of the games in Rhythm Tengoku, and there's like at least one new monkey game in every Rhythm Heaven game after, with Fever having like 4. This game probably introduced the most recurring content, which isn't too surprising considering it's the first game. But of course, with any popular game, a sequel was most likely inevitable. With the 3DS still being 5 years away, and the large popularity of the system, the next title would, of course, release on the Nintendo DS. On July 31st, 2008, Rhythm Tengoku Gold was released. In terms of individualized gameplay, this title is arguably the black sheep of the franchise, due to its control scheme. The game is almost entirely controlled with the touchscreen, with the exception of the pause menu and the bended strumming cue in Rockers 2 and the guitar lessons. Rhythm Heaven's core structure is the same as Rhythm Tengoku. You still play through practices to learn how to play minigames, then play a remix. The main unique aspect, however, is the touchscreen. In most games, there are 2 types of inputs per se. Tapping is the simpler action, typically used for quick, constant actions, like a punch, though it is sometimes held and released. Striking the stylus across the screen and letting go, called in the game flicking, is used for more complex actions with more build-up, like a kick. This flicking control scheme reportedly took a whopping 6 months to fine-tune, and they considered having you touch the edge of the screen for certain actions, among other things. There are also exceptions to flicking simply being a more complex action, such as in Rhythm Rally where you constantly flick the entire time. This may be because flicking is a better way to simulate the act of whacking a paddle forward than just tapping. There are also a few more unique ways the touchscreen is used. mainly sliding it back and forth without any release, like how Love Lizards has you shake back and forth to the beat, or how Love Lab has you shake up and down, copying the patterns of the first Scientist. Other than the controls, as a sequel it's kinda just more minigames and a more polished feel. This title ironed out things to the way it is for most of the series, introducing just 4 games that are remixed rather than 5 like in Tengoku. The remixes in this title pretty much always have unique visual aspects, though it is still fairly often just a change in palette. In Rhythm Heaven for the DS, every game is brand new, at least in basic concept. There are some references, like how Rhythm Rally features the Space Dancers or how Built to Scale is widgets and rods, but they are at least attempting to be unique. That is, barring one exception, Karate Man. Karate Man is back in this game. This is not some port either, this is a whole new era. To start, the game has a brand new color scheme and song, and is once again given unique lyrics. This isn't reusing the basic character and theme like Built to Scale either. This is a true sequel to the original Karate Man from 2006, featuring everything from the first, along with a new move, a kick. Along with the pots flying in, occasionally a barrel will fly in. When you punch this barrel, it breaks open and a bomb flies out. You are then meant to flip and send the bomb flying. From here began the push of Karate Joe as a series staple and a mascot. Though he may not be featured on the box cover or the title screen, his games are always given significant esteem. With one justified exception, a Karate Man game is always the penultimate challenge, the final traditional game before the final remix. After Karate Man is the last remix. There are once again 6 sets before the credits. This game changes the Tengoku way and sets the staple of the final remix being a new song like a regular remix. The medley type remix still happens though, as the final remix overall, the 10th remix. Yeah, this game has 4 post-credit sets rather than 2. This is the only entry where no remixes have lyrics, though 4 regular games do have songs, as well as the extra credits game having a bonus song. All of these games besides the credits game get a sequel with a new version of the song, although one of them is an instrumental in the sequel. The post-game sequels are somewhere between Tengoku's final set and Tengoku's post-game in difference. The songs are new versions that are covered in a different style, but the visuals aren't quite as different as they were in that 6th set. Also, a few sequels actually introduce new audio cues. Take for example, Fan Club 2, which introduces a new cue.
For you, yeah that's right. I wish that I was yours, but I'm too shy, I suppose.
Rhythm Rally, Philbots 2, and Rockers 2 also do a new cue. As such, these games feature a practice. As I said earlier, Rockers 2 actually features a button input, where you press the shoulder button to make the notes bend. The ranking system is the same, and the content from medals is the same with toys and endless games, and the cafe returns, but instead of drum lessons are guitar lessons. Rather than using a unique concept, these are pretty much an expanded version of Rockers, including the button input, but playing to other songs from the game. After training, you can perform them in the Battle of the Bands, which includes an audience. This entry is the best-selling of the entire franchise. It sold a great 1.92 million copies in Japan. Also, due to its success and the DS still being active this time, it was the beginning of the series' appearance overseas. It was released in North America on April 5th, 2009, under the title of Rhythm Heaven. The title is essentially as direct of a translation as you can get, as Tengoku is the Japanese word for heaven, though it kind of means just a good place overall, rather than specifically a good afterlife. Most Western fans call the first game Rhythm Tengoku simply to differentiate it from the DS game. A bit later, on May 1st, 2009, Rhythm Paradise was released in Europe. Why it's called Paradise in the PAL regions beats me. I've seen it suggested it was due to religious references, but the word heaven is used in every translation of Megamix, though that was 7 years later. On June 4th, 2009, the game was released in Australia, also under the Rhythm Paradise title. Lastly, on September 24th, 2009, the game was released in Korea as Rhythm World. These translations are mainly just that, translations, changing the text and songs as well as a lot of basic voice clips. There's also the occasional minor difference like a title card's graphic, but these are quite rare and again, minuscule. The biggest is probably that any Japanese garb, such as in Samurai Slice, is changed in the Korean version to garb more closely resembling Korean garb. But if you're watching this video, you probably didn't play that version. I can't speak much about Korea or Australia, but in Europe and the US, it had some heavy marketing. In fact, there's actually an ad of Beyonce playing in the Glee Club game. According to the iffy source of VG charts, it sold 500,000 copies in both America and Europe each, for a total of 1 million between these two big Western territories. We do know that it sold a total of 3.04 million copies, and Korea isn't exactly a giant games market, so I'm guessing these numbers are fairly accurate. Overall, and especially in Japan, this game was considered a big hit, and for good reason. Over 3 million isn't absolutely insane, but it is more than many other small Nintendo series that today get far more mainstream attention, including every individual Pikmin game on their own, ARMS, and even every individual Fire Emblem game before Awakening. The Japan sales are also quite good on their own merits. ARMS in Japan sold just about 1 million rather than almost 2 million, and as of December 31st, 2019, Xenoblade 2 worldwide pretty much had the exact same sales of the DS version just in Japan. And do note that 1.5 million of those Japanese sales were before the game even came to America. According to a link on Wikipedia, it died even on the archive, but you know what, I can believe it. I can confirm from investor reports that it sold 1.7 million in Japan by August 2019. However, according to some financial reports from NOA, it seems that the 1,120,000 overseas total was considered underwhelming by them, typically saying in quarterly results that we also introduced Rhythm Heaven in Europe and the Americas, but regrettably it did not perform as well as we had hoped. It may be worth noting this was in January 2010. It's possible they felt better about it later. Regardless of their thoughts, it did sell 1 million outside of Japan, and due to the game's big success, it would of course get a sequel, and the sequel would once again come overseas. Three years later, we got a Rhythm Heaven title on the Wii. On July 21st, 2011, Rhythm Heaven Fever, or rather, Mina no Rhythm Tengoku, which translates to Everybody's Rhythm Heaven, was released. This was somewhat of a return to form, once again using buttons, but also used a lot of the new staples from the DS title. It's the first and so far only Rhythm Heaven game to release on a home console rather than a handheld. The gameplay is like the GBA entry in that you press buttons for actions. It's generally closer to DS in terms of the amount of action, as there are two input types, pressing A or pressing A and B at the same time, never any D-pad, likely so the Wiimote can be held vertically. Also, as you can likely tell, this game finally gave us Ko Takuchi's iconic artwork in motion. You may recognize this art style from the WarioWare series, which was co-developed by the Rhythm Heaven team. Though the prior titles had featured his work on the box art, merchandise, and other such material, hardware limitations restricted the in-game graphics to pixel art. With the power of a home console behind it, there was no holding back Ko's graphical glory, allowing the visuals to pop like never before. Something maybe worth noting is this game's treatment of the tutorial/host characters. In Tengoku, the samurai drummer appears at the start, end, and drum lessons. That is it. DS had the band leader appear at the start and end, and he is featured in the Frog Hop and Frog Hop 2 games, but that's really it. The hosts of this game are a trio. They are Cam, a blue creature, Miss Ribbon, a pink creature, and Marshall, a white creature who heavily resembles the Chorus Kids, but his actual relation is unknown. These hosts appeared during not only the tutorial and end, but also in the credits game. Marshall is in the end credits of the final remix before the credits, and all three are in the end cards of the very final remix. Lastly, they also appear on the box, which was not the case for the band leader nor Samurai drummer. Fever uses the 4 games in a remix format of the DS title, but this time has 7 sets before the credits. The game has a bit of a more extravagant feel, I'd argue. Beyond just the graphics themselves, there's a lot more background detail to appreciate. The practices, rather than all using one song, now have a simplified chiptune version of the minigame that you're about to play that omits the main melody to focus on the rhythm and percussion elements of the song. The remixes are also taken to yet another level, with very different visuals in almost every instance. I often see this game being claimed to have the best remixes of the franchise, and in terms of music I may prefer some from DS, but if we're talking about graphics and how the games are blended together, I think I may agree. This game also expands the library of recurring minigames, but not quite in the same way as Karate. Built to Scale returns from DS and Tengoku. This time retained the Built to Scale title, but the controls and timings are different. It's just the base concept. Samurai Slice returns, which was in Tengoku and was in DS as an endless game, but the visuals are completely different. The timing is a bit different as well. A new rapid slashing move is added. Anyway, these are certainly inspired, but don't match Karate Man in the way of expansion. Joe's triumphant return replaces the kick with a combo move, where a barrage of pots fly in and he punches them repeatedly. After this is Remix 7, then the credits. Like DS, the credits have lyrics and are playable. In this game, only the credits, Karate Man, and Karate Man 2 have lyrics, but 3 remixes also have lyrics. The post-game has just 2 games with new cues, both of which are in the final set. Remix 10, like in DS, is a medley of games. The cafe is back, and this time has the music player rolled into it. Via this game's credits, it's also fully explicit that the dog, who has occasional connections to the cafe, such as the icon and such, is indeed the one who runs this cafe. The medals unlock endless games and rhythm toys like before, though notably unlike the past 2 titles. All the endless games are original. They do not have any endless versions of regular games. If you perfect every single main game, you unlock an endless remix. I believe this is the first time the series has had a main reward for perfecting everything. But admittedly, I have never actually gotten every perfect in any Rhythm Heaven, though I am changing that this year. I know someone making a video like this should probably have already done that, but sorry. Anyway, there's also a rhythm toy, Rhythm Fighter, that is actually 2-player, who make a beat and then copy the beat to dodge the punches and kicks. Or fail. This game does not have a video game equivalent of learning an instrument like Tengoku and DS had, but rather, the side content outside of the toys and endless, well, there's 2 main pieces, but the bigger one is multiplayer. Early on in the game, a secondary multiplayer menu becomes available. Only 8 of the games in Fever have a multiplayer version, though it is more fleshed out than the Tengoku arcade multiplayer. You unlock the multiplayer version after clearing the single-player version. These have you play versions of the game where there are 2 characters, color-coded as orange and blue. In some games, this adds an additional player to the screen. In others, it takes a group of NPCs and the player, and makes it so that rather than only one of them being player-controlled, 2 are, and they are given visual distinction from the rest. The gameplay has both players doing things at the same time, as well as often having sections where one player is isolated from the other, whether it be obscured visuals or an actual part where only one player has to do things. At the end, it gives each player a score, and then combines it, needing teamwork to pass it. If one player does perfect but the other does terrible, you generally will not pass it. If you get a Superb on these two-player games, you get a Duo Medal. These allow you to play two-player endless games. Most of these are unique, but the final one is an endless version of the regular minigame Bossa Nova, which does not have a two-player version outside of this. Probably because rather than performing the same moves at the same time or trading off, this endless game has you both performing different patterns simultaneously, making it kind of impossible to do with one person holding both controllers. The two-player content is likely part of why the game is given the Everybody's Rhythm Heaven name, though in the Miwata Asks they also mention that the background details are a part of it. So they were added due to being on a TV, and as such likely having more spectators. Lastly, in terms of side content, there's the extra games. You have to get to the credits to even access the menu to them. You will also have to have superbed everything thus far to unlock the first of them when you beat it, and to unlock them all you have to superb 44 of the 50 games. What are these games? They are 4 remastered versions of games from Rhythm Tengoku. The visuals are like that of the rest of Fever, and the music is used from the Rhythm Tengoku official soundtrack, rather than the compressed for GBA in-game soundtrack. The practice themes match the original rather than the new unique style. They are the full games, including a scoring system and all, though you don't get any medals for superbing them. They're kind of self-contained. Using games that were Japan exclusive may be a good segue to localization. The game came to America as Rhythm Heaven Fever on February 13th of 2012, and had a full-on launch event. In Europe, it was released on July 6, 2012 as Beat the Beat Rhythm Paradise, and it released on the 13th of September 2012 in Australia with the same title, and the 12th of September 2012 in Korea as Rhythm World Wii. This title arguably has the most localization differences. It does everything the DS game did, including the samurai garb, but notably Fever has some outright gameplay changes when localized. There are 2 main instances of it. Firstly, one input in Remix 9 is changed to better match the flow of the English lyrics. More importantly, the extra game Manzai, based on the Japanese comedy act, was considered too specific to make sense overseas. As such, it was replaced with a recreation of Mr. Upbeat, the first endless game from Rhythm Tengoku, which would of course be new to the majority of people playing the series. Since Mr. Upbeat was the first in Tengoku and Manzai is the last in Mina no Rhythm Tengoku, the entire extra game selection was rearranged, with everything requiring the amount of medals the game after it does in Japan. Also worth noting is that Beat the Beat Rhythm Paradise has a vocals option, allowing you to switch voice clips and lyrics to their Japanese counterparts. I'm unsure if this is included in the Korean release, but I'm going to assume no. But this is the reason why it came 4 months later compared to America. Unfortunately, despite this game being a big leap for the series, it was rather lukewarm in sales. While it did sell 100,000 units in its first week in Japan and sold out right away, according to VG Charts, it only sold 890,000 copies by the end of its lifespan. While I do not have a solid source, the source that confirmed the total sales of the DS game only documents games that have sold over 1 million, meaning it did indeed sell under 1 million. According to the also seen as unreliable video game sales wiki, 654,000 of these sales were just Japan. Honestly, from this perspective, there was a time some felt the next title would not release overseas, or we may not even get one at all. However, perhaps due to this game seeing more internet attention and memes and such, or perhaps just due to realizing the game releasing on the Wii only a few months before the Wii U overseas would have sales, we did see a sequel, and it did come overseas. A new Rhythm Heaven had been worked on for a few years, but development would be disrupted by tragedy due to Sunku going through laryngeal cancer treatment at the time, which then led to outright vocal cord removal. His passion for the series was enough that he was able to stay strong and help as much as he could in treatment, but it's possible this is why the game features so much recycled content, though nothing is explicitly confirmed. Announced on January 14th, 2015 in a Japanese Nintendo Direct, Rhythm Heaven Megamix, or rather than Rhythm Tengoku The Best Plus, is a Rhythm Heaven game that is built around not only being a new title, but showcasing a lot of the series' content. It actually got a skit during its reveal, featuring Iwata punching pots like in Karate Man, showing once again Joe's importance. Up to launch, it got decent marketing, such as singers of one of the game's vocal songs singing it on stage, and many ads that showed this art of a variety of rhythm games, with Karate Man often being the start. As for the game itself, it takes a lot of the games from the first 3 titles and mixes them around with new ones sprinkled in, via the format of an actual story. It has some neat quality of life changes too, like allowing you to restart a game from the menu or skip the title intro, showing how early or late you were with the correct input, still counting it but telling you if it was truly frame perfect, and rather than simply telling you try again, okay or superb, has a meter. If you get under 60, it's a try again. If you get from 60 to 79, it is an okay. Anything above that is a superb. Relevant to the timing window is that during select hard or important moments of the game, star pieces will come together. If you hit this at the exact right time, as in what would normally not show late or early, you get a skill star. Skill stars give you extra coins. As for that story, the game opens with a strange pink bear named Tibby falling from the sky, as his home, Heaven World, is up there. In order to send him home, you must increase your flow. There was a flow meter in previous games to show your average skill, but it is exponentially more relevant in this entry. The power of your rhythmic abilities will create energy that will power up things, allowing you to progress. The first chunk of this game is divided into lanes. You will see a flat plane with 4 cardboard pieces representing a game, and a character will have a problem that they have you solve before you can continue. It is solved by completing all 4 games in the land. Before and after this, there is a decent amount of dialogue, and in between each game is a piece or 2, usually about a new item that appears in the area due to the increase in flow. At the ending dialogue, due to their problem being solved, they open up the gates and let you move on. Rinse and repeat for the 6 lands. The format of games is in the order of the franchise. The first is a game from the original Rhythm Tengoku. Next comes a game from the DS entry, then a game from Fever, and lastly, a brand new game. However, for the majority of this game, the returning games aren't just ports. Firstly, even on a surface level, the GBA and DS games have the graphics updated, and the DS games now use button controls. Fever is pretty much the same, though to the lower resolution of the DS they are actually lower quality, though they do sometimes add some extra effects to make up for it. In addition though, for most of this first half of the game, these are prequels to the past games, being shorter and generally easier, sometimes not even using all the cues. They also all have practices, even if the game lacked a practice in Tengoku. They use the Fever style of practice music, with games from Tengoku and Heaven receiving new practice tunes. This is true for the first, second, third, and fifth lands. Some of these being easier at this point makes sense, like Air Rally, a game previously in the third set, now in the first. However, many are at around the same point. For example, the very first game is an easier version of Karate Man, the Tengoku Karate Man, which was the very first game of the series. Overall, in terms of the games on their own merits, Megamix is pretty easy compared to the other entries. The new games during this section of the game kind of follow this prequel format, being quite short and quite easy, but there are exceptions. Like, I'd say First Contact feels more like a regular game than a prequel. Part of the reason it feels this way may be because in the case of the prequels of older games and every other new game with a sequel, they have a completely new song, rather than a simpler take on the same track. The 4th and 6th land have the games as the original, though of course with new graphics in Tengoku and DS's case, and new controls in the case of DS. The new game is also a bit longer and more average feeling. Also, oddly enough, there is no real side content like Toys and Endless games, but in between the 2nd and 3rd, 4th and 5th, and after the 6 lands, is an endless game that you have to get a target score. The first two return from DS and Tengoku respectively. The third is new to Megamix. The one from DS is what you play first, being Coin Toss. Then you do the GBA one, which is actually one of those endless games that's an extension, being Endless Sick Beats. Regular Sick Beats is not in this game. After the sixth land, you move on to towers. The first tower is games that lack prequels. There is dialogue before the tower and after, but inside is none, just a new column, reminiscent of the previous entries. After these four, you finally play a remix. After this tower, 6 new towers open, with the same theme and characters as the 6 lands. You can play these in any order, though in-game material, such as the museum and credits, showcases them in the same order as the lands are. These towers feature the original, more challenging versions of returning games, except they're impossible to talk about, because Glee Club 2 in Megamix is Glee Club 1 in Heaven, but then Karate Man is a prequel and the original Karate Man is Karate Man Returns. Now can he be returning if this is actually the first ever Karate Man from 2006? So anyway, the Megamix games are more fleshed out true versions, which as I said have a different composition than a remix, with the exception of First Contact to Second Contact. Each tower is a remix at the end. Towers 4 and 6, the Donut Tower and Songbird Tower respectively, are unique in that the returning games lack prequels, so players starting with Megamix will be encountering them for the first time. The remixes this time match the theme of the land. The first land is Honeybee Land, the background is honey related as the character. The titles of the remixes are also not numbered, probably due to the non-linearity. They just have the theme added, like Lush Remix or Honey Remix. The remixes of this game are visually pretty much like how Fever did it, though I see Fevers get praised a lot more. After the last remix, the credits play. Though unlike DS and Fever, there is not a playable credits game, though it does have lyrics. However, after this, the post-game is decently beefy. A new plot appears about Tibby's mom having hiccups in Heaven World, and you need Flo to get through areas then reach her. You play through 3 lands, all featuring games that haven't appeared in Megamix up until now, and are ports, not prequels. The balancing can once again be questioned as some of these post-game games are super early in the past games. Seesaw, only the 3rd game in Fever, is in the post-game. Anyway, there are also 3 new games, which are of average length. After these lands, you go through one last endless game, this one from Fever. Though interestingly it's from Fever 2 player, they just make it so instead of each hand of this mannequin being individually controlled, both work at the same time. After this, the column system returns as you go to Tibby's mom and go through 3 towers. Each is entirely sequel focused, with a sequel to a game that appeared during the first set of towers, in a few cases being the 3rd version of that game in Megamix, like Figure Fighter. You can play the left or right tower in any order you wish, though the 3rd cannot be played until both are fully completed. Many of these sequels are meant to be seen as unique, like in the 6th set of Tengoku, titles and all. Clappy Trio 2 is a thing in the towers, but the 3rd is called Snappy Trio, for example. Pretty much any game that a title will be affected by this has changed, like what if given a number title in Megamix would be called Rhythm Rally 3, is now called Cosmic Rally. Though despite this, Figure Fighter 2 and Fever, reused here with a prequel therefore making it the 3rd, is just Figure Fighter 3. There's also changes just for a more unique title, like Frog Hop 2, ported from DS, which only has 1 appearance up until now and could be called 2 and be accurate to both, is now called Jumping Jazz. Each tower has a remix, and they split the typical medley remix into 3. Left-hand remix and right-hand remix both have 16 games. Then, you unlock Tibby's Mom, the main tower, and the final few games. The first 3 are reused sequels, but the last is a sequel to a Megamix game, or rather a new game that is within the context of Megamix's story, a sequel to a Tengoku game, but truthfully a sequel to many games throughout the series, 2 of which not appearing in the story. Karate Man is back, but Karate Man is back. Joe is not here. In the ultimate version of Karate Man, called Karate Man Sr., you play as Joe's father, who is the master referred to as assessing you throughout the series' results screens. You perform the typical Karate Man formula, but instead of a new mechanic being introduced, both the kicks from DS and the combos from Fever are here. After this, you play the final remix. There's all the games not represented from the left and right hand, plus some reused. The remix starts with 16 games that were not in the final remix, covering every main game in Megamix that wasn't already in Left and Right, with arguably the exception of Karate Man Sr., the right-hand had Karate Man represented. After this, it transitions to a segment consisting of 3 sequels for each game from the left, right, and main towers, specifically using the sequel assets. After the 3 games, the endless game of that game appears. The music for this part is also related to each Rhythm Heaven, playing the title theme of each game during this section of that game. Also, Karate Man Sr. is in the Megamix section, so even with that argument it is represented, though its song does not play. After this, you play this game's practice, then it plays the game it started with, and ends. That's all the main content, despite having no endless games besides being able to go for a high score on the ones you did during the story, not to mention no toys or any instrument learning or even an outright 2-player mode, it still has a fair bit of side content. The cafe is more fleshed out than ever, with characters appearing in it, the barista giving up his 9-year secret identity and just showing himself outright as the dog, and some side areas. Firstly, you can play Versus Figure Fighter, where you play the figure fighter game against a CPU, punching to inflate your opponent's balloon in hopes to defeat them. The higher level the CPU, the more precise you have to be, not only worrying about actually hitting it on time, but also the aforementioned timing window. This also has Street Pass compatibility, though you simply play against a record of their score, not them directly. This game uses the Rhythm Fighter music from Fever. To the left of this is a goat, which you feed onions in a simple pachinko format, increasing its level. It also has a shop, letting you buy things for a museum, which is to the far right. It serves 3 main functions. Firstly, it allows you to look through all the games in a quick menu, though there is already a quick menu that lets you scroll between lands and columns. This is even quicker. Second, it shows supplementary content, an item with a little blurb of text for each game, its music. Both of these have to be bought with coins, but also let you see the Try Again, OK, and Superb cards, though you need to get that high. If you get a Superb, you can see them all, but if you've only got an OK, you cannot see the Superb, for example. And lastly, at the very top are some additional games. If you pay with Flow Balls, the acquisition of which we'll delve into shortly, you can unlock 18 additional games. Due to Fever having a much closer art style, it seems here they threw equality between the games out the window, as these extra games let you unlock 3 from Tengoku, 3 from DS, and 12 from Fever. This does not include sequels and such, that count as just for the original game concepts. Anyway, these can be obtained by paying Flow Balls. Flow Balls are obtained in one of 2 ways, both of these in the same area, the Challenge Land. There are 2 things in this place. The first is the Perfect Campaign Tent. It lets you go for a perfect, but has its own dedicated area, and this time the game will automatically end if you miss a beat, whereas in past entries the perfect would X out but you would keep going. You get 1 flow ball per game you perfect. Also here is the Challenge Train. This has sets of challenges featuring sets of games, often to a theme, like sports, though some are random within a theme and some entirely random. In addition to having to go through a set of games, you will often have certain conditions that must be met. Fail to meet them, and your train will use 1 unit of battery. Mess up 3 times, and it's over. Firstly, most games will require you to get a certain score, often higher than 60, sometimes even over 80. The game's tempo can also be changed at times, pretty much always faster. Aside from this score requirement, a different condition is sometimes added. Monstergle has the game zoom out towards a giant monster. Each frame perfect input, given in this game the title of Ace, zooms in a bit more. If you zoom out all the way, the monster will roar and eat the game, causing you to fail and lose a battery unit. If you beat the game without the monster eating it, you'll move on to the next. The other condition is lives. During a game, you will either have 3, 2, or 1 heart/hearts. If you miss a Q or get a barely, you lose a heart. If you run out of hearts, you lose a battery unit. If you beat it and still have at least 1 heart, you move on. There are a fair amount of challenges, split into 3 sets. These can also be played with up to 3 other people, though it's split screen, not a Rhythm Heaven Fever type. Your scores are combined, though the amount required is raised more and more with each player added. In a March 2016 Direct, the game was announced to be coming worldwide. America simply announced it, but Europe gave it a skip, this time themed around Glee Club. During the E3 2016 Treehouse, on June 16, 2016, the game was shadow dropped in the US, but unfortunately digitally only. Europe would have to wait until October 21st, but would get it physically. It launched the next day in Australia, also physical. Then, on December 1st, 2016, it was released in Korea. The localization was, frankly, kind of disappointing. On the positive side of things, every version has the thing that Beat the Beat Paradise did where the vocals can be changed. This is more relevant in this game because, of the 4 vocal songs new to Megamix, none of them are localized. Honeybee Remix's song had English lyrics in Japan, it reuses them in all versions. But Machine Remix, Lush Remix, and the credits song Classmate, which were in Japanese, feature no vocals when the voices are set to Japanese. The vocal lines instead being replaced with a synthesizer, trumpet, and piano respectively. I understand that vocals are probably rather costly and the game is digital only, but even still it is quite disappointing in my eyes. Also, of the games never before localized, only outright words in voice clips, like the audio in Space Dance, is changed. There's not any voice clips changed because it's a Japanese voice shouting in a wordless manner. But overall, considering how well Fever did here, I'll take what I can get. They had a lot of reason to not localize it all. The sales numbers for it are a bit iffier, but I can say from research that it topped Japanese sales charts top 50 for a while. And while I don't know how well it did in the West, it topped them for a bit, and I'd wager over half of the people in the Rhythm Heaven fandom that I've seen have started with Megamix. Though it is obviously just a sample size. What we do know about sales is it sold 158,000 units launch week in Japan, and by February 2016, it had sold 650,000. According to a Japanese video game sales book, as of the end of 2019, the game has sold 1 million units. It is unclear whether this is overall or just in Japan, but either way, it is as such the second best-selling Rhythm Heaven game. So that's the history of the Rhythm Heaven series. Whether you know it as well as I do or just learned everything from this video, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it has a future beyond this, and I will definitely talk about my expectations for that at some point. But for my next video on this celebration, let's look at the history between this franchise and Smash Brothers.